Happiness is nothing more than good health and a bad memory. Albert Schweitzer, 1875 to 1965. The dawn sky was just starting to lift from solid black to a soft shade of blue when Laurie pulled her car into the station's lot. She stepped onto the pavement and peered at the disheveled turn-of-the-century building with its darkness and unsettling stillness. There was one window ajar on the second level, through which Laurie could see a dim red light and hear a faint rhythm. She walked through the front entrance and dialed a 3-digit code listed on the cardboard-thin wall for the radio station's control room. A loud buzzer sounded shortly afterward and unlocked an inner glass door. Laurie knew where the control room was from the few times she had observed the station's program director operating the mixing board. She quickly ascended a long flight of carpeted stairs leading up to the room that she had seen from the outside in the parking lot. She slowly opened the door. "Hey there," Nick said cheerily. He glanced up at her for only a brief second before turning his attention back to the knobs and levers of the mixing board. "Take a seat. Laurie, right?" "Yes. You can watch me for a while, okay?" "Okay." "This is a pretty easy one. It's a gardening show. No special liners or sound effects. You just let them talk." Laurie placed her purse next to an open carton of yogurt on a shelf, and then quietly sat down on a metal chair and positioned it to face him. She tried absorbing the pattern of his hand movements as they glided from one end of the board to the other, but he was going far too quickly for her. She reminded herself that this was just a college internship, and that she'd get credit for doing it, no matter how bad she was at it. She blankly stared at a rose tattoo on Nick's thin, muscular upper arm. Dressed in a concert t-shirt and baggy polyester pants, he had dark, spiky hair cut close to his head and a frizzy ponytail jutting out the back. Laurie's own hair was unwashed and lifted off of her forehead with a brown plastic headband. Because she had been running late, she was wearing the same gray sweatshirt with matching sweatpants that she had slept in the night before. Ordinarily, she would have been self-conscious about her appearance, but Nick didn't seem to be paying much attention to her. He was focused mainly on overseeing the mixing board in front of him. "So how long have you been here for?" Laurie asked. "Oh, about 7 months." He placed one hand on his hip and kept the other pressed against a gain pot, keeping a close eye on the levels of the VU meter. Soft, muffled voices were coming through the audio board and making the meter rock steadily back and forth. The room suddenly got very quiet. It was too early on a Sunday morning for there to be much of anything in the way of background noise, such as the bustling kind that you would hear on a weekday afternoon with cars and trucks whirring past on a nearby roadway. With the eerie silence penetrating the dust-filled air of the control room like a sharpened sword, Laurie struggled to keep the room filled with sound. Any kind of sound. "So what?" She moved her body closer to the edge of her chair. "What were you doing before?" "Before when?" he asked. "Before you started working here." "I used to follow the Grateful Dead," he said, stretching his arms out to both sides and opening his mouth wide in a yawn. I did a lot of traveling. Got to see all sorts of places, meet all kinds of people, experience—" He stopped. "What?" "Oh, you know," he chuckled and raised his eyebrows high into his forehead. "Experience all sorts of experiences." The chuckling turned into laughter. Laurie sat quietly and looked at him for a moment. "What, She noticed a fly had landed on her wrist. Its legs were tickling her. "What did you do for money?" She lifted her arm up and shook the fly loose. "Oh, you know," he said. Laurie continued looking at him. "This and that." The fly landed on a black gain pot at the edge of the mixing board. Nick shooed it away with his hand. "I got by," he said. "It was just for a few years. Decided to give it a break on my 21st birthday this past April." He looked at Laurie, as though waiting for a response. She stared back at him, not knowing what he expected her to say. "Do you believe me, or are you staring at all the little gray hairs on my head and thinking to yourself, there's no way?" "No, I believe you. I can't really see the gray hairs," she said. "They're from all the drugs I did." He started to laugh. "Ah," she said. She didn't know whether to stay straight-faced or smile. Was he joking with her, or telling the truth? She felt numbness in her cheeks. It was the same numbness that overcame her many times in the past when she'd find herself plagued with social ineptness. He brought the microphone pot down with his thumb and forefinger and raised another pot up that brought a hillbilly banjo duet to air. With his fingers on one hand lightly touching the surface of the pot, he pressed down on the keys of a nearby computer with the other hand. "What about you?" he asked. "What is this for you? An internship? You in school?" "I go to Springfield U," Laurie said, watching as he lowered the theme from Deliverance just in time for the first commercial spot to be played. She wondered how he could time everything so perfectly and still be able to concentrate on talking to her. One of my best friends, she continued, this girl Angela. She just got her first job doing reporting on radio for a local news network, and she's kind of an inspiration to me. I'm thinking about switching majors from science to communications. Science is the reason I'm here right now, he said, adjusting the game pot. Why? I was in the hospital for 4 months straight. He looked up at her. Had a heart transplant. He studied her face for a response. Oh, she said. She nervously glanced away from him and tried to find something to focus her gaze on that would help her to take the news in better. Her eyes fell on his fingers. His nails were curved around his fingertips, which looked abnormally enlarged. He noticed where her eyes had fallen. What? He asked. Your fingers, she said. They just look, yeah. He let out a strained laugh. It's part of my condition. Her eyes fell to the floor. The words faux pas flashed in neon pink in front of her. She wished she could take both her show of ignorance and display of tactlessness back, but they were splattered like projectile vomit all over him. Still have marks on me, he said. He turned his body toward her, lifted his shirt to his chin, and traced his fingers along some pale tracks underneath his chest hair. He shook his head and let out a sigh. I remember feeling so tired for so long. Used to get out of breath really easily. I'm feeling so much better now. I'm glad. All 'cause of science. Gave me a second chance here. Up until then, Laurie had been following in the footsteps of her older brother, a graduate student in the biochemistry department on the Central Springfield campus. She had been mesmerized by all that he had been learning over the years, and she marveled at his unyielding energy and the long hours he dedicated to the lab. She fantasized that he was spending every minute of every hour thinking and plotting strategies that could lead to cutting-edge discoveries that could redefine life as it had up until then been known. Seeing Nick, though, put her brother's hard work into a different perspective. She felt suddenly ashamed, realizing that she had never looked beyond the frivolous flash and glamour and self-fulfillment to see the true impact of that kind of work on a person's life. All of the future Bob Weir and Phil Lesh concerts Nick would still have the chance to go to, with his hair wrapped in a handkerchief and his tie-dye shirt covered with beads, could be traced back to someone's late-night toiling in a lab. You want to give it a try? Nick asked. Give what a try? This, he said, laughing. He pointed toward the mixing board. Oh, she hoisted herself onto his warm, padded chair. With his guidance, she stiffly and awkwardly moved audio pots up and down and pushed buttons on verbal command. She could see the mechanics over time becoming rote, just as so many procedures she had learned in biology lab had become with enough practice. Yet there was so much downtime in between maneuvers, during which she was forced to listen to banter about Hedera helix selectas needing semi-shady locations and peace lilies requiring low lighting, that she was actually having trouble keeping focused on the clock. What happened to the break? Nick asked. He had just returned from a vending machine on the floor below. Laurie looked over at the clock. Her hand hovered shakily over the microphone audio pot. What should I do? Nick set an opened can of juice down, quickly leaned over her, and pressed down on a button. Late break coming, guys. Get ready. He waited a few seconds and with one hand slowly brought a bed of ragtime music up under the host's voices. With the other hand, he pushed a lever that set the nearby computer loaded with commercials in motion. You're clear, he said to the invisible hosts before grabbing his juice can and guzzling it down. I'm sorry, Laurie said. I'm not too good at this, am I? You're a little slow. Laurie sighed softly. I'm just teasing, Nick said, laughing. Laurie woke up early the following morning. She slipped on a loose pair of pajama bottoms, sat down on her dusty hardwood floor, and began to do a series of stomach crunches. She continued until the lactic acid buildup in her upper diaphragm reached unbearably painful levels. She swept her hand over the curvy surface of her bare stomach, hoping to detect a difference in its density compared with how it felt just 10 minutes earlier. She stood up and walked over to her mirror, dropped her pajama bottoms to the floor, and stared in awe at the slightly flatter-looking silhouette of her torso. Could she have really lost unwanted fat in only 15 minutes, or was it just her posture creating an illusion? Staring at the wild, untamed unibrow that sat like an awning over her eyes, she wondered what she would look like if she didn't have the means to occasionally keep all chaos in check, if she just let herself go. She wondered whether, if man had not created metal tweezers, pore-minimizing makeup, and electric shavers, evolution would naturally select only fair-skinned, lean blondes for the purpose of non-alcohol-inspired procreation? It was all a cruel joke, the sudden turn her body had taken, just as she was finally starting to recover from the long-term repercussions of her adolescence, when her nose had shadowed her entire face, and her fragile sense of self was particularly vulnerable to the verbal ice-pick slayings typical of her unhinged Third Reich contemporaries. With wire-frame glasses and metallic braces added to the mix, she might as well have been strutting around naked in a cage filled with ravenous, rabies-infected Rottweilers with slabs of raw meat strapped to her ankles. She had emerged from junior high and had entered high school as traumatized and shredded as an unwanted, petrified fruitcake, uneaten and regifted for decades. A fruitcake used occasionally as a mock football by young, restless children screwing around in basements on Hanukkah. It was hard for Laurie to envision herself as anything other than the fish-skinned, algae-infested, bog-spawn creature from hell her peers had convinced her she was and always would be. And not being able to see herself differently from how others had once seen her, she was left to wonder who in his right mind would want her. And how could she realistically be expected to want anyone in return who obviously wasn't in his right mind? She chose to believe what they led her to believe about herself, and she allowed their unmitigated attacks on the already deformed spine of her soul to contribute to her eventual emergence as somewhat of a broken spirit. Rutherford was one of the few people Laurie knew who could really relate to her. So could Angela, and it was heartwarming to her to know that they were both a part of her life and could share in the recollection of the misery of their respective pasts. But she hardly ever physically saw either one of them anymore. What with Angela's new reporting job keeping her busy at all hours of the day and night, and Rutherford's growing obsession with his laptop computer and preference to funnel anything that came to his mind into typewritten electronic messages. From Sirius Schmendrick 4428 at AOL.com. Subject, he's back in black. To Laurie Solomon 6697 at Yahoo.com. Dearest Laurie, I don't know if you remember or not, but when I was about 13 or 14, people would make my life miserable because I had braces and acne. I doubt if you know the social horror and futility of weighing 320, or was it 330, pounds. I had a stretch of time where 6 straight girls said, no thanks, when I asked them out. 6 in a row. And these girls weren't exactly Victoria's Secret models either. Ugh, I'm getting ill just thinking about it. I'm a master of disguise, in case I never told you. The truth is, I've never revealed my true identity to anyone. Whenever you see me, I'm in my big white dork persona, but in actuality, I'm a shorter, skinny black guy. Rutherford, also known as the Tick.